system.
I should mention that there are two crises that will determine whether it's even worth talking about these issues. One of them is the growing threat of nuclear war. The other is the climate crisis, environmental crisis, which has to be dealt with in the next few years, or else human society is essentially finished. So unless these two crises are properly met, everything else is moot. Let's assume somehow we'll be able to deal with them. Then we can talk about the current geopolitical crises, shifting centers of world power, unipolar versus multipolar, is very much in the news right now, just as the questioner pointed out. Actually, these are issues that go back to the end of the Second World War. Much have a lot to do with something which is very live today, status of Europe. The end of the Second World War, of course, the US had overwhelming power, dwarfed the rest of the world in wealth, power, security. So it was the dominant power in the world for the entire post-war period, really. There was a question as to whether Europe should carve an independent course in international affairs. Should it become what was called a third force, right, along the lines suggested by Charles de Gaulle of France, Philippe Brandt in Germany, others? Or should it stay within what's called the Atlanticist framework, the NATO framework, basically run by the United States? That issue became very much alive when the Soviet Union collapsed, 1990-91. Mikhail Gorbachev, Soviet leader, proposed what he called a common European home from Lisbon to Vladivostok, with no military alliances, no victors, no defeated, common work for a more or less social democratic future. Well, that didn't last very long. Go into the reasons. But coming up to the present, the question is the Ukraine war Ukraine invasion of Ukraine by Russia has brought this to the fore very sharply. The world is now very much divided on this. That's what the news is about. Almost the entire, outside of Europe, the United States, England, the US allies, most of the world is calling for a diplomatic settlement to try to end the horrors before they get even worse. The United States position is different. US position is formal position. The war must continue in order to severely weaken Russia. Well, the world is split on this. And it shows up in the framework of unipolar versus multipolar global organization. One effect of Putin's criminal invasion of Ukraine has been to end, at least temporarily, talk of an independent Europe. It's driven Europe completely under the control of the United States. So it's much to its detriment. It's suffering, going into industrial decline because of this, may continue. Its natural trading partners, Russia, not a strong economy. Its economy is about the level of Mexico, but an enormous source of resources and raw materials, minerals, and so on. Europe is short of those. It's economists call it a marriage made in heaven. It's a natural trading relationship, and it's been broken. And of course, this cuts off Europe's access to the markets in China, huge market. For the German-based industrial system in Europe, China's been an enormous market. that's the U.S. Which is insisting on the unipolar framework of world order, wants not only Europe but the world to be incorporated within something like the NATO system. In fact, at its last NATO summit meeting, under U.S. pressure, NATO expanded its reach to the indo-pacific region. That means that NATO is now committed to taking part in the U.S. conflict with China. It's a global system. Most of the rest of the world is trying to develop a multipolar world with several independent sectors of power. So the so-called BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Indonesia, South Africa, they want an independent source of power of their own. That's about 40% of the world economy. It's not small. Making independent relations with China, with Russia, independent of U.S. sanctions, independent of the U.S. dollar. So these are conflicts that are developing worldwide over one raging issue and one developing issue. The raging issue is the war in Ukraine. The developing issue is the U.S. conflict with China, which in the longer term is far more significant. The U.S. China is, of course, a second major power in the world. It's growing, developing, it's pursuing its own course, developing loan and investment and development projects throughout Eurasia, reaching to Africa, Middle East, South Asia, even to Latin America. It's now the major trading partner for Latin America, U.S., and the U.S. is determined to try to prevent Chinese economic development. The Biden administration has virtually declared kind of war with China, demanding that Western allies refuse to permit China to carry out technological development. The U.S. has sufficient control over elements of the advanced technology so that its U.S. laws now insist that others not allow China access to any technology that has any U.S. parts in it, which almost everything does because of the intricacy of international supply chains. So, for example, take, say, the Netherlands. Netherlands has the major lithographic industry, which produces critical parts for semiconductors, the source of the modern high-tech economy. Now, Netherlands has to decide whether, under U.S. demands, to lose the China market, its major market, or whether to move an independent course. Same is true for Samsung in South Korea, Japan. The world is really splintering on these lines.